Welcome everybody and good afternoon. Manya, it's great to have the opportunity to chat to you about your book. It's a great privilege once you've read a book and you've really enjoyed it to get the chance to speak to the author. How many people have actually read Manya's book? So quite a few of you. So for the benefit of anybody that hasn't read it, Manya, could you just say a little bit about the book, where it's set, and then Manya's going to read an extract from the book.
Okay, so the book is set in 1907 in Poland. It's set in a part of Poland slightly southeast of Warsaw. It's set in a town called, in Yiddish, Mizrich. The town still exists. In Polish, it's called Mizyn-Zizich. And it's about three boys who go on the road from Mizrich to Lublin with a suitcase of brushes and bristles to sell. And it should be a short journey, and yet, of course, problems occur. They're three boys with very different characters and temperaments, and you ask, what could possibly go wrong? They're all 14 years old. As I said, 1907. What else? Oh, and Mizrich was a very famous capital of brush and bristle manufacturing at the time. Brush and bristles to the world. This is awkward. I will try to take everyone in. Okay, so I'm just going to read a little bit from the beginning so that you have a sense of the context of the novel. Do I actually have to talk right into this? Maybe not. Okay. And the only thing you may need to know is at the time, people were never pronouncing the name of God. So instead, I know today we may say Hashem, but in those days they said Adoshem. Okay, so that's the only. The sky is as bright as a polished shoe. Elia has never known a sky like it. Over Mizrich, the sky is often dark with fumes from the tanneries, smoke, ash, cinders, wood shavings, winged insects, small birds, flying cats, prayers, curses, and avenging visions of Adoshem. Here, on the open road, a lad can breathe. Elia fills his lungs. Everything around him is alive and vibrant. With a joyous gasp, he tries to take it all in, pitying the poor unfortunates who have not been invited on this excellent trip. The twins, Yassel and Yankel, Benjamin, Zeman, Benish, Nachum, Moishe Fishben, Moishe Untermeyer, and all the others. How they must envy Elia, Kiva, and his cousin Ziv, three trainee merchants headed for the great markets of Lublin to sell brushes. Lublin, Elia cries, and they all cheer. They grab, push, and shove each other playfully, Ziv snatching their shoulders, Kiva and Elia running away, Ziv catching and pummeling Kiva. Hit him in the kishkas, Elia cries with delight. The road, which is wide, flat, and smooth, becomes even wider, flatter, and smoother. Unclenching his fists and throwing back his shoulders, Ziv glides ahead of the others with his seldom used long-legged stride. When he runs, it's impossible to catch him Thin and hard, Ziv should have been fast, like a tall, slender dog. But he's often droopy and slow, walking as if he's just staggered through a 12-hour shift at one of the brush and bristle factories in town. But now he walks with a spring in his step. Ad Hashem makes beautiful roads, observes Kiva, in his well-constructed shoes and superior socks. Kiva walks briskly too. At this rate, they'll reach Lublin in no time. Then Ziv needs to stop and pee, prone to faintness of the kidneys from the beatings he gives and takes in the back alleys of Mizrich. He pees against a hedge at the side of the road. Kiva blesses the road and the emptiness of the road, both sides of the road, the middle of the road, the sky above the road, and the birds in the sky above the road, the hedge on which Ziv pees, and the leaves on the hedge on which Ziv pees. Is he finished? Not yet. Kiva blesses their conversation, which immediately dries up. Then he calls down blessings on Elia's vision and Ziv's bladder. Let nothing obstruct either. Kiva prays at every fork in the road, over every dead animal, flattened under the wheels of a troika, before every sip of water, every meal, every snack, upon seeing anything beautiful, smelling anything nice, wearing anything new, hearing good news or bad. There's even a prayer in celebration of moving one's bowels after a period of constipation. Soon, the road narrows to a carriage track meandering through field and into forest. Elia eyes the landscape greedily, turning his head this way and that. At the side of the road, in a copse of trees with smooth gray barks and hairy leaves, they forage for walking sticks. Over here, Elia calls out. He cuts sticks for Kiva, Ziv, and himself, trimming the leaves. Don't we need permission, Kiva asks, peering nervously through his tight iron spectacles. According to Ziv, wealthy Poles from Warsaw own these woods, or Russians living even further away. Nothing to worry about, he smiles slyly. Of course, if we happen to meet a land capitan, run. The local capitans protect the absent landlord's estates, flogging peasants or poor travelers who dare to trespass. The peasants should own this land, Ziv declares, which is another one of his daft ideas. Peasants owning land? Then he smiles, dazzling them with his big white teeth. Everyone else has small teeth, bad teeth, no teeth. Only Ziv's teeth, which he won't have for long, are perfect. Aren't you going to bless the peasants, he asks Kiva. You blessed everything else. But Kiva decides to reserve his blessings. United by tradition and strong faith, the noble peasants, Ziv explains, share tools, labor, and the cigarettes they roll from home-cured tobacco. Having little care for privacy, peasants essen from a common pot, schluffen in a common bed, and kaken in the open air. All healthy, normal, and natural. Kiva listens with distaste. He wouldn't like to share a bed or bowl with others or do his business in the open air. But the forest shimmering in the sun is most attractive. The Tsar comes here to shoot birds, Ziv reports. Here? Hereabouts. He was shooting birds when his workers, as he calls them, aroused by foreigners and Yiddische Menschen, marched on the Winter Palace. Ziv prepares to talk at length about the revolutionary movement, but neither Kiva nor Elia want to hear more. Beyond the forest, there are streams and lakes, grasslands, hills and valleys. In every direction, there are wonders, a row of bushes with waxy leaves, trees thick with branches, creeping plants and climbing plants, berries ripening in the sun, moss growing in the shady places, and a deep, consoling silence unimaginable in Mizrich, where Yiddische Menschen shout, cry, joke, argue, or loudly lament the price of eggs, nuts, pelts, and shoes. Thank you.
Thank you, Manya. That's lovely. So I guess you already get the picture. This is a road movie, set in Poland back in 1907. Yeah. You've got 3 young lads, 14. So I guess if you can imagine when you were 14, I don't know where you were brought up or anything, but if you can imagine the biggest town furthest away, that must be what it appears to these 3 lads.
It's a big market town, so, it's where they can make their fortune. And yes, it's a road trip, it's a coming-of-age novel. I always used to introduce it by saying it's like the film Stand By Me, if anybody's seen that. It has a bit of that about it.
Yes, and your central characters, these 3 boys, they're all very different, but they have similarities. I said this to you when we talked before, that I felt they were kind of man-childs, is that the expression? Because they're trying to be adults, they've got ambitions to be adults, they're wondering what that's going to be like, but they're still very childlike. And from one minute to the next, their loyalties change, and the way they fight with each other, and the next minute they're friends. But because this is a festival of books and belief, I want to ask you about Kiva, because Kiva, as I say, they're all different. One of the boys, Ziv, doesn't believe in the Almighty. Kiva does. He feels they're very important. Can you just talk a bit about him? And
yeah. Okay, so, what motivated me was conflict, and these 3 boys, reputedly, they start off as friends. You can imagine what might happen because they're very different. And I won't tell you what happens, but, things start disintegrating fast. And Kiva is the very religious one. Elia is the very ambitious one. And Ziv is a bit of a bully, and he's a little violent, and also believes in socialism at the time. So, we've got this conflict here. And, they are, I suppose you grew up fast in those days, but they are still boys, they're still adolescents, and so that you've got that bit right. And, I don't know what more I could say about his, Kiva's beliefs, but they start annoying the other 2 more and more, and he becoming more and more dependent on his on his way of thinking and on his beliefs as things get tougher.
Yes. I mean, belief comes in various different ways, I would say. And with Kiva, they kind of challenge him. But I also got the feeling that occasionally when things really go bad, they wonder if there's anything in his beliefs. And for anyone that doesn't know in Judaism, and forgive me if there's a rabbi in the room and I'm getting this wrong, but there is a bracha, a blessing for everything, and so he takes that to quite extremes. And I think, Manya, you're very playful the way you write. But the other thing I thought is there is a fourth character in this book, which is the environment, which, without being heavy-handed, you describe very well, and it's very important. So I did think when you were reading for the first time, I thought, well, the Kiva is great because he blesses the trees, and for us, 20, 30 years ago, when people started talking about hugging trees or blessing trees and saying thank you for the trees, people didn't take it seriously. But now we think we should be thankful for the environment.
Well, the environment is in fact very heightened, and I did that purposely, for effect and for drama and for intensity. This is a lost world, and there was a point at which I almost went to Mizin Zizic to look around. And at the last minute, practically, I decided, no, I didn't want to, when I read that there was a McDonald's and also Mizin Zizic basketball team called the Mizin Zizic Hurricanes. So, the whole thing didn't feel right to me. So I just wanted to go with the stories I heard. So my grandmother was actually from that town. So this is all fiction, but it's based on stories I heard as a child from my grandmother, who left Mizrich in 1910 and emigrated to the United States. And but she told stories all the time, and I just, I loved how, unbelievable they were and how like fairy tales and quite dramatic. I wanted to sort of channel that energy in the novel, which, is funny and sad, and there are jokes and there's, sadness. I tried to plait those together in a risky way because, the culture, there was sadness and there was joy and there was laughter, survivors, humor. And Ilya is based on, very loosely, my grandmother's brother. So Ilya is the ambitious one. He's holding the map. He's the one that wants to sell the brush and bristles in Lublin, make his name. And my grandmother's brother, who I actually know nothing about, other than he was the one who stayed. So everybody else emigrated to the United States, he stayed. And the reason he stayed was because he managed to be successful selling brushes and bristles to the point in which he had his own factory. So he really had something to lose, and he didn't leave Poland with the others. So, that's all I knew about him, and I imagined him as a 14-year-old boy who's Ilya. That's a long answer. I don't know.
It's very good. Because the other thing I was going to ask about the inspiration, there's a lot of Yiddish in the book. And don't be frightened, don't be scared, because a lot of the time you get the meaning of it if you don't know any Yiddish. Other times you don't, and that's quite fascinating as well. And you can go to any internet search engines to find it, but it's quite interesting because it's also part of the texture and the character. Tell me about your own background, because you grew up in New York, you now live in Newcastle, slight difference there.
I'll say.
But tell us about the household that you grew up in and the languages that you heard.
Okay, so Yiddish was in fact my first language, and was spoken at home, and I have a love of it, and I hear it often in my head. So I wanted to, and I thought it was very appropriate to include it in the book. And as David is saying, yes, you can understand the words by the context, by the way in which they're used in the novel. So, I really love the Yiddish language. My grandfather was quite a Yiddishist and instilled that love in me. And I very much like the Yiddish writers, always been very influenced by them, read them a lot, like two in particular, Isaac Bashevis Singer and Sholem Aleichem. In fact, I feel very connected to Sholem Aleichem, famous Yiddish writer who ended his life in New York City. And I will tell you an anecdote about that. One time when I was a little girl, we were driving around and we were in the Bronx. We were going to the Bronx Zoo. And near the Bronx Zoo is Kelly Avenue, which is the last residence of this famous Yiddish writer, Sholem Aleichem. And my mother points to it and she says to me, "This is where your father and I lived when we were first married, and it's where you were conceived." Which, nobody wants to know, but it made me feel really somehow crazily connected to Sholem Aleichem. And not only is there Yiddish words, but there's something about the syntax, the word order of Yiddish, that is very prevalent in New York English. And I try to also get it into, the sentence structure. So there is a feeling, the rhythm of it, as David was saying, it's woven in. It's voicey, I suppose you could have heard that already.
Yes, definitely. And another enjoyable thing, you can hear I'm biased about this book, can't you? Is that the three boys have their own particular voice. We've heard about Kiva being very close to Adashem. We've heard about the entrepreneur, Ilya. And then there's Ziv, who at 14 wants to be a revolutionary. Did he was he inspired by anyone that you knew? Or?
Not really. No, I just, I don't know, another writer I love very much is Anton Chekhov. So you may know Chekhov from plays, but also as a short story writer. And he once said, just take three characters and put them in a troika, and you've got a novel. You've got the beginnings of a novel. And, so I tried to make them as different as possible. And also, it's been suggested to me since, although I'm not sure I even thought this, that they do each represent a certain direction of Jewish thinking at the time.
That's interesting.
That hadn't been in my mind. I was just trying to create as much conflict because conflict is what drives a novel. Anybody here writing, that's the thing that keeps the reader reading and keeps the novel, moving ahead.
Mm. But interestingly, you mentioned Chekhov, and when I was reading it, I was thinking that this is a novel where nothing seems to happen. And yet everything happens, because obviously they're on this journey, and I thought of things like Waiting for God, or and that where you can look at it and you think, well, nothing. They're not moving very fast, But that's the point, because for the three boys, what's happening in their minds is changing all the time. But there is a physical journey as well, yeah. And particularly this thing of them being adult and child at the same time.
Growing up is a journey, and the literal journey, yeah.
And I constantly was surprised about how, one of them could be horrible to the other, or two against one even, and then the next minute you manage to pull them round and they're the best buddies.
three characters is magical because you have allegiance, changing allegiances. So that keeps the writing, kind of vibrant. And there's also, we haven't mentioned this yet, what the reader brings to the text. What the reader brings, because the reader knows, in some sense, how this is going to end. The reader knows that in, 30 years, 35 years, it's the fate of this world. And so that adds something else, I think, to the novel. I always tell this story that when it was first launched, they got the publicity wrong, and they said this was a novel about three boys running away from Nazis. So, of course, that was crazy, and it drove me nuts. But then when I thought about it, I thought, we bring that. The reader brings that to the novel. So I was playing, all along I was playing around with time. I was trying to make something set in the past very present. So I did that it's written in the present tense. I was trying to make it sound modern and contemporary and voicey, which is also, it feels like a contemporary read, not like a historic novel that's, feels written in a historic language. So the language, I thought a lot about the language of the novel.
Yeah, and the history and politics of Russia and Poland and surrounding countries at the time is fascinating and terrible as well. But we see that through their eyes and their imagination, don't we?
Yeah, and so at the time, Poland was partitioned between Germany, Russia, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So there was no Poland. And this bit of Poland where the novel is set was Russian. So they paid Russian taxes, they filled out Russian forms, they knew the Tsar was the leader of the, so it was a very Russian state at the time.
And the fear of the Cossacks is always in their thoughts, and they build that up. But surprisingly, if I could say this without spoiling anything, at times Ziv quite fancies being a Cossack. He quite fancies being on a colossal horse and riding through villages.
Well, I had teenage boys myself, so I sort of mined that experience and, tried to make it as, as realistic in a way as possible. While it's not a realistic, in many senses, as I said, it's a heightened novel, not a realistic novel. And I was also, of course, it has something happens. Even though nothing happens, something does happen, and I hope it's a good read. But I was also interested in the words on the page. And I always remember this thing that my grandmother used to say, that words and eggs should be handled with care. So,
That's a good phrase. Yeah, I mean, going back to nothing seems to happen, I say that because, every so often for the boys, there's the feeling of they're not getting anywhere. Where are they going? And poor Ilya, who's the leader, and, he thinks he's got this great map, he's dealing with the journey and where to go and navigate it. And please remember, there was no sat-nav in these days. I don't know if you knew that. But so he's got that, but also he's got his little army of these two other boy men who, are quite hard to handle, aren't they?
They are hard to handle, and they become harder and harder, and so everything falls apart as it often does as they journey. Yeah.
But having said that, you're still waiting to see what happens. I think that's one of the momentum of the book. You are always waiting to see, will we get to the end of the journey? What's going to happen?
And also, you know, when you have three characters with very different personalities and characteristics and interests, in any given situation, they will behave differently. So as soon as you decide one of them's religious, one of them is a rebel, one of them's ambitious, given any different situation, they will say different things and act differently. So, you know, that moved the novel along as well.
Yes. So let's just turn to craft. You know, did you plan out the whole novel, or did you just start with a blank page and the idea of the story and take it from there?
I did have a plan, but once I started writing, I held the plan very loosely. So if anybody's writers here, I would suggest you plan, at least know something from the beginning, something from the middle, and definitely the end. And some people plan very, very assiduously. I didn't do that, but I did have plans. But then as you write, you want to keep it vibrant and alive, so holding the plan very loosely, by which I mean allowing accidents to happen, you know, which seemed to me to be important. And another thing I did, which was surprising, I have taught on a master's degree in creative writing at Newcastle University for many years. And one thing I would always say is never use an omniscient viewpoint. So an omniscient viewpoint is very 19th century. It's very old-fashioned. And what it means is that the reader gets a little bit of the thinking from a lot of characters. These days, we want our novels more intimate. So the viewpoint is either first person or what they call very close or intimate third person. But what did I do? I used an omniscient viewpoint. So you get a lot of different characters, you know. But somehow it worked, you know.
I think so. So you surprised yourself there.
I did.
Were there any days when you wrote something that took you by surprise and thought, I've created this situation or that?
Frequently, yeah. And, you know, the thing is, the decision is, you know, is this a good surprise? Is it, you know, going to overturn the apple cart? You know, some surprises are too big. Writing is tough. You have to balance everything. Mm-hmm. But yes, that's what I mean by, you know, I had a plan, but I was willing to stray from it when that seemed appropriate. But knowing, oh dear, you know, you're very close to it. I don't know why anybody writes. It's hell.
Well, I mean, I think it can be fun, can't it?
It can be fun, of course. I take that with a grain of salt.
Because another quality, I think, in the texture of it is it's a mixture of realism and surrealism at times, and a bit almost like a Chagall painting, because there's a texture to it. There's their imagination, there's what really happens, and there's the threat of things that are suggested.
Yeah. I love that comparison to Chagall. Yeah, I hope that it has that, you know, that feel to it. Yeah, absolutely.
And a question you don't need to answer, but did you have to write lots of different drafts, or how does that work for you?
Hundreds. No, I'm exaggerating, surely. But because the words on the page were really important to me, I did go through a lot of drafts. And what writers often do is they elaborate and then they contract. So I just threw loads in and overwrote and, you know, and that. And then I looked at it and I thought, oh no, and pulled it all out again, making it very spare and minimal. And then I thought, oh no, and I threw it all back in. So this happens.
The thing that we haven't really touched on is the jokes, because Eva, is that how I pronounce it? Ilya. yeah, Ilya keeps telling jokes. And that's quite an interesting thing, because some of them work and some of them don't for his friends.
Most of them don't. He's not very good at it. They don't land, he doesn't have the right timing. And once or twice when Ziv tells a joke, it's fantastic, So there's all this tension between them that's very funny. And the jokes are funny and sad. The jokes are like that survivor humor that I was mentioning before. So, and also they occur in the text at a time where they seem to comment a little bit on what's going on. So, he has a joke for every occasion, but they're just, either they're really unfunny or it's his delivery is, poor Ilya. He's trying. He's trying.
I mean, sometimes he's trying to rally the troops, isn't he?
Oh, constantly.
But there again, there's that feeling that he's obviously heard lots of jokes, and he's trying to, mimic the people that he's heard telling jokes. But I thought it was a very clever device, because he's trying them out, and sometimes they don't work, and it's a bit like, that's safety for you, because if we don't get the jokes,
you don't like
it doesn't matter, they're kind of funny by, as well. For that
Somebody once asked me, where did you get those jokes? And my response is, I had uncles. These are uncle jokes.
Yeah.
Some are good, some are...
No, it was a nice quality. And I think that's the nice quality about the novel. There's so many elements to it, and things do keep changing in the way the story is told. So we're going to, in a few minutes, we're going to have questions, if you've got any questions. But for the recording, and we're also going to make a podcast of this for the Edinburgh Jewish Cultural Centre and the Literary Society, the Edinburgh Jewish Literary Society, and we don't tend to put the questions and answers on. So I'm going to now thank Manya, and hopefully you'll give a nice round of applause, and then we'll do the Q&A. So, wait for it. Steady. Manya, thanks very much. It's been fascinating to hear about the book from your perspective, and I'm sure there's lots more questions we'd like to ask you. So thank you again, and good luck with the book.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Was that the right length, Hannah? Is that all right? Yeah. So now we'd like to open it up, and if you've got any questions you'd like to ask Manya, please indicate.
Hello, I'm Janet. I just thought I'd open things up because I know sometimes people are terrified of asking the first question. I'm sure there'll be lots in a moment. Right at the beginning, I think David mentioned that it's a bit like a road movie, and I thought that's very much an American tradition in films, books, etc. And I wondered whether Huckleberry Finn was in any way an influence on your writing.
Not now that you mention it. Yes, of course. They're great classic, and you're right. A lot of one of my favorite books, although very harrowing, is called The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Whoa. But I like books like that, and maybe it's an American thing coming out as well. So, and like I said, it's a road movie or a road book, is already a structure. So, it's ready-made structure.
There's Grapes of Wrath as well, I suppose.
Excuse me?
Grapes of Wrath.
Grapes of Wrath, oh, yeah, whoa.
I was very interested in you talking about the omniscient third-person narrator, and I was wondering if you found that that almost becomes like another character in the process. And in my retirement, I'm making my way to the Waverley novels of Walter Scott, And you couldn't get a more bold, narrator than that, who is constantly breaking the fourth wall and so on. But so, really linking to the previous question, you began to answer, I think, possibly. Would you agree that it becomes almost like another character?
Yeah.
And if so, what kind of character did you find that becoming for you?
Yeah. I didn't know. Well, so that narrator has got a very wide view. So I bring things into the novel that haven't happened yet. Things that have been invented, things that these people are never going to experience, that the narrator knows, that omniscient narrator knows. So I just rejoiced in it. And I think you're right, it does, the narrator can become tetchy at certain points and, fed up with them and things like that. What I felt I was doing and why I wanted that wider view was it's a bit like world building. It's not speculative fiction, but, it has that similar, I'm building a world that's gone, and I felt, very humbled by that, and I wanted the view to be, quite wide. They say sometimes that one of the reasons to use a more intimate narration, first or intimate third person, is because the reader identifies more with that, feels closer to, and identifies more with the protagonist. And also, it helps the focus. You know who you're rooting for. But I hope to overcome that. You always have to make decisions when you write. So that was one I made. Yeah.
So I know we have a question there. I'm just wondering about this side from the king. So we'll go there and then to this gentleman here.
Hi, Manya. I was thinking before you said this that these three characters represent three very recognizable strands of Jewish life, particularly in Tsarist Russia at the time. So the very orthodox, the kind of mercantile, and the revolutionary socialist. What is strikingly absent from this tripartite division, of course, is Zionism. Yeah. And I'm just thinking that 1907 is neatly halfway between the First World Zionist Congress and the Balfour Declaration. Yeah. So what is your thinking? What was your thinking? Could you say something about how whether you saw the place of Zionist thoughts at all in this wee part of Poland at the time? Yeah,
I'm sure it existed. You're absolutely right. I think I was quite influenced by my grandfather, my thinking, in a way, quite unconsciously, who was a Bundist, not a Zionist. So, the recollections that I heard, so it almost didn't enter my, would I to do it again, I would have remedied that. But it was mediated through my own experience and the stories that I heard. So I just didn't do it. But yes, of course, it was beginning to be quite the thing. And this was Mizrich was not a tiny town. It was really a big commercial, and it had an international feel of it because of the big brush and bristle factories and exporting. I mean, yeah.
Lublin would have been a bigger?
Oh, yes, Lublin would have been bigger. That was just the one industry in Mizrich, but it was a big one.
Yeah.
It was a big one.
So I thought the aspiration for Ilya was Lublin, but also he had his eye set on New York as well at one point, didn't he?
Well, if Lublin failed, it was... and, also they manufactured, a lot of the brushes were manufactured from pig hair, which apparently could be handled once it was shorn from the animal. So that was, that I do, that's true, I think.
So
No, I
I
know.
think the gentleman here had a question.
I was so fascinated by the book. I'd just say that to start with. I find the issue of time and how time is handled, you've already touched on this, so it's very present in terms of the early 20th century.
Yeah.
But all the time lurking in it is both a feeling of the Cossacks and the fear about the Cossacks and the pogroms and so on. So we're going back very recent history as far as the story's concerned.
Yeah.
And then there's a foreshadowing of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And I was thinking as I read it, it was so light touch. I was wondering how you would handle it. But then I suppose anybody who starts reading the book and knows that it's situated in that part of in Poland anyway, but in that part particularly, and at that time, you're immediately, especially if you're a Jew, you're going to be thinking about what happens. It's impossible not to.
Yeah.
So I suppose my question about it is whether did you have to really control how you dealt with that? I mean, you clearly wanted to foreshadow, but there would be a danger that it would swamp and distort the novel in some way.
Light touch is really the word, and also building, so the foreshadowing, the imagery builds as the novel progresses. And, in that context, you mention trains and ditches and, all those words begin to be very powerful when they're just ordinary words. But truly as the novel progresses, the indications of the future grow more and more explicit, but never wholly explicit. So I was trying to control that. Yes, and it's a delicate thing because, like you say, it could really overshadow everything. There is a point at which it comes to a head at a wedding, but up until then we're careful. But with what we know, when you read certain things, it sets off bells in your head. It sets off images. Yeah.
In response to another question about...
Need to point it to...
In response to another question about you're having an overview and yourself, as it were, as the writer presenting these, getting quite tetchy with your characters at times.
Yeah.
It made me think of another important road novel, namely the 5 Books of Moses. And he gets pretty tetchy with his subjects too at times.
Yeah.
And I wondered if that gave you any inspiration.
Yeah.
And may I ask another little question? Were your uncle's jokes better than Elias?
No, definitely not. No, definitely. And yes, you're right that it does have that Old Testament, fiery feel about it. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. And I read, and there is a bit of Song of Songs in it. There's references here and there. Yeah. Bible.
I just have to comment on the beautiful, unabashed use of Yiddish.
The beautiful,
unabashed use of Yiddish, and such beautiful Yiddish.
Yeah.
Eva would be proud.
Yeah.
But just really a question, which is, have you sent this novel to anyone like Jesse Eisenberg? Anyone want to make a movie out of it?
Anyone like, I can't remember.
Jesse Eisenberg, a real pain.
I know.
Obviously he arrives in Lublin.
I know, I've seen that film. I have a stage, film, and television agent, but, I don't know, that's quite difficult to break into, I think. I don't know. I think it would be perfect. Just a word about the Yiddish also. my hope was that in reading it, everybody would pick up 1 or 2 Yiddish words and use them in their daily life, because they're so good, aren't they? They're so good. Yeah.
Any more questions? Oh, one at the back. There we go.
Hi, thanks for sharing about your process on writing and craft. I mean, you mentioned that you usually begin with a plan, but you sort of follow it loosely. And I just wonder whether, while you are writing, each of the drafts and getting to know the characters as a writer, was there anything supposedly surprising, about the characters' development arc, or did they all develop in the way you anticipated from the beginning?
Yeah. I think I did plan rather carefully. And because some of my background is in writing script, and David will know, it's very craft heavy, script really. So what I really emphasized was the various characters' motivation and their obstacles, so as they proceeded through the novel, both grew. The more they wanted something, the more they didn't get it. And moreover, not only didn't they get it, they got what they didn't want, so which is a technique, I think, anybody who's written any script would know. Yes, so I planned all that much. But then as I proceeded and certain things happened, they made other things that I'd planned impossible. So, you need to be flexible enough. Writers do all sorts of plans. I know writers who draw diagrams. I know writers who write a whole first draft that's a plan, very, very quickly. I didn't do that because I want to hear the voice. I want to get the voice in my head. And some people have mentioned that the novel feels filmic, like it could be a film. And curiously, when I write, I don't see it, I hear it. This is very odd. Most writers see it. And if they're very lucky, they see it and it starts moving. But I hear it as if somebody's whispering it in my ear. So I have to get the voice right. So I would spend a lot of time playing around with different ways of writing. Yeah.
I think sometimes with writing, when something is complete, then the reader or other people or even yourself can look back and think, oh yeah, this follows that kind of plan or that way of writing. But when you're in the battlefield of writing, did I say battlefield? You're just maybe concentrating on the characters of the story and not necessarily thinking about technique. There are hundreds of books on how to write, but if you read them all, you'd never write anything.
Okay, have we exhausted everybody?
We've got to Lublin.
I think this conversation could go on for a very long time, but we are running out of time because the next event will take place in half an hour in this room. So I'd like to invite us all to thank Manya and David once more for their wonderful conversation, and all of you to join us in the Rainy Hall, join Manya, buy a copy of the book, have it signed, and continue this fascinating conversation for a little longer. So thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you.